The evening fell gently over the small house by the rice field, wrapping the world in a tender golden hush. The sound of crickets hummed softly beyond the bamboo fence, and the air smelled of rain and earth, the scent of life reborn after hardship. Inside, Huyen sat by the small oil lamp, her hands trembling slightly as she folded the last piece of laundry. The soft glow lit her face, calm yet uncertain, as if she were holding her breath before a change she could not name. Dee was outside, finishing his work by the fence. The faint sound of his footsteps on the damp soil echoed with something familiar, quiet, steady, and kind. He had always been like that, a man of few words, but his silence carried safety. When he entered the house, wiping his hands on a towel, Huyen looked up, startled for a moment, then smiled shyly. "Everything's done," Dee said softly. His voice was low, like the hum of distant thunder, strong but never frightening. She nodded, not trusting her voice. The lamp flickered. Outside, the wind brushed through the banana leaves like whispers from another life, a life she had left behind. For years, love had meant pain. It had been a cage, a storm, a wound that never healed. But tonight, with Dee standing quietly across the small wooden table, Huyen felt something different, something fragile and luminous. Dee noticed her hands trembling and stepped closer. "Are you cold?" he asked. She shook her head, though her heart was racing. "No, just thinking." He smiled, a faint, almost invisible smile. "You've thought enough for one life, Huyen. Maybe now you can rest." Those words, simple as they were, felt like a door opening inside her. For the first time, she did not feel the urge to run. The shadows that once haunted her seemed to fade in the warmth of his quiet presence. That night, when the rain began to fall softly on the roof, Huyen sat beside Dee by the oil lamp. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. The silence between them was not emptiness anymore. It was peace. And as she looked at him, this man who had stood by her through storms, who had built her a home, who had never demanded anything but honesty, Huyen realized something she had never believed possible. Love, when it is real, does not demand. It heals. It does not break. It shelters. And for the first time in her life, Huyen was no longer afraid. The first light of dawn crept through the bamboo curtains, painting soft gold across the wooden floor. A rooster crowed in the distance, and the faint mist over the rice fields began to lift. Huyen stirred awake, her head resting gently against the pillow, and for a moment she did not remember where she was. Then she turned slightly and saw Dee, still asleep beside her, his face calm, his breath steady like the rhythm of the morning rain. For a long while, she simply watched him. The lines on his face told stories of work, of patience, of kindness earned through hardship. There was no trace of anger, no shadow of cruelty, only peace. A quiet smile touched her lips. In another life, she might have feared waking beside someone, but now, this moment felt almost sacred. She reached out her hand, hesitated, then lightly brushed away a strand of hair from his forehead. Dee stirred slightly, then opened his eyes, a bit surprised, before smiling in that gentle, wordless way that always softened her heart. "Good morning," Huyen whispered. "Morning," he replied, his voice still heavy with sleep. "Did you rest well?" She nodded. "Better than I have in years." Dee sat up, stretching his arms, then glanced outside. The rain stopped. The fields will be bright today. They both stood and went to the kitchen, where the smell of wood and rice husks mixed in the air. Huyen began to prepare breakfast. Simple things: rice porridge, salted eggs, and tea. Dee fetched water from the well. They moved around each other easily, as if their hands already knew the rhythm of this shared life. When Maya woke up and ran sleepily into the kitchen, she blinked at the sight of them together and smiled with childlike innocence. "Uncle Dee, are you staying here today too?" Dee laughed softly. "If your mother allows me." Maya giggled, looking at her mother for permission. Huyen blushed slightly but nodded. "Yes, Maya. Uncle Dee will stay. He belongs here now." That sentence lingered in the air like a blessing. After breakfast, they stepped outside. The sunlight spread gently across the wet fields, and the sound of frogs faded into birdsong. Dee walked with Huyen to the garden where young vegetables were growing: tomatoes, spinach, morning glory, all planted with hope and care. He looked at the green leaves glistening with dew and said quietly, "Everything grows better when it feels safe. People are the same." Huyen turned to him, her eyes softening. She wanted to say something, but her throat tightened. The simple truth of his words sank deep into her heart. That morning, as the breeze brushed against her hair and the warmth of sunlight touched her face, Huyen felt as if she had stepped into a new season of her life, one where love no longer frightened her, and where peace was no longer a dream. It was the morning after fear, and the beginning of a quiet miracle. The afternoon sun drifted lazily across the sky, laying soft shadows over the small yard. Huyen sat by the porch, weaving a basket from thin bamboo strips while Maya played nearby with Baby, their loyal dog. The laughter of the little girl filled the air, light, innocent, healing. Dee was fixing the old fence behind the house. Every so often, he looked toward Huyen and Maya, his eyes filled with quiet affection. He didn't need grand words to express how he felt. Every gesture, every small act of care, spoke louder than any promise could. When the sun began to dip, Huyen put aside her work and walked to him. "You've been out here all day," she said softly. "Come rest for a while." Dee nodded, wiping sweat from his forehead. They sat together beneath the shade of a mango tree, the sky slowly turning orange. For a while, neither spoke. Only the sound of cicadas and the gentle wind broke the silence. Then Huyen spoke, her voice low and trembling slightly. "Dee, do you ever think about the past?" Dee paused, his eyes distant. "Every man does, I suppose, but I don't let it own me anymore." She nodded slowly, fingers twisting the edge of her dress. "I used to live in fear every day. Even when the pain was over, it stayed inside me, in my breath, in my dreams. I thought I'd never feel safe again." Dee turned to her, his expression soft. "And now?" Huyen looked at him, really looked, into those calm, patient eyes that had seen both hardship and hope. "Now, I'm learning that love doesn't have to hurt. That being cared for isn't something to be afraid of." Dee reached out, his rough, calloused hand gently covering hers. "You've been brave, Huyen, stronger than you think. You've built a new life from ashes, for yourself, for Maya. I'm just lucky to walk beside you." Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness but from release. "You don't know how much those words mean to me." He smiled faintly. "Maybe one day you'll believe them." For a moment, the world seemed to pause. The wind stopped, the birds quieted, and even the sun held its breath behind the clouds. Then, from the distance, Maya's voice rang out, calling them for dinner. Huyen stood, brushing her tears away, her heart lighter than it had been in years. As they walked back toward the small house glowing in the golden light, Huyen realized something profound. She no longer carried her past like a chain. It was still there, a part of her, but no longer defining her. Because love, when it is gentle and true, does not erase the past. It teaches you how to live beyond it. Evening settled over the little house like a soft blanket. The sky glowed a gentle pink, and the smoke from the cooking fire curled lazily toward the fading light. Inside, the smell of stewed vegetables and freshly cooked rice filled the air, a scent that always made Maya run excitedly to the kitchen. "Dinner's ready," Huyen called, setting the bowls on the wooden table. Her voice carried a warmth that came not only from the food, but from the peace that now lived inside her. Dee came in from outside, having just finished feeding the chickens. He washed his hands, then helped Huyen arrange the dishes. "You've outdone yourself again," he teased lightly. Huyen smiled. "It's just vegetables and rice, Dee. Nothing special." "It's special because you made it," he replied simply. Maya giggled, her little hands clasped together in delight. "Uncle Dee, you always say that." They all laughed. The sound filled the small house, echoing off the bamboo walls, a sound Huyen hadn't heard in years. Laughter that was real, not forced. Joy that came from belonging.
As they ate, the oil lamp flickered gently between them. Dee told a story about his childhood, about chasing buffaloes and falling into muddy ponds. Maya laughed so hard she nearly spilled her bowl. Even Huyen, shy at first, couldn't hold back her laughter. After the meal, Maya sat on the floor, drawing shapes in her notebook, while Dee and Huyen tidied up the dishes. When the house grew quiet, Huyen lit another lamp and sat beside Dee on the small porch.
The night was cool and full of stars. Fireflies glowed softly among the banana trees. For a long while, neither of them spoke. It was a silence not of emptiness, but of peace. A silence that said, "We are here, and that is enough." Finally, Huyen whispered, "Dee, thank you for giving me back the feeling of home." Dee looked at her, his eyes gentle. "You and Maya brought the home. I just helped fix the roof." She smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. "No, Dee, you brought something I thought I'd lost forever: safety and love." He reached out, brushing the tear from her face. "Then promise me this," he said softly. "Don't ever fear love again. Because this time, it's real." In that moment, under the wide, forgiving sky, Huyen realized that love wasn't something she had to survive anymore. It was something she could live in. The house behind them glowed faintly with the lamp's golden light. Maya's quiet humming drifted through the door. And for the first time in a long, long while, everything felt complete. Not perfect, not grand, but deeply, peacefully whole.